Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I'm your host and co-founder, Aaron Breitman, and it's my pleasure to welcome in Dan from Gopher Insight to talk to us about Rutgers' newest offensive coordinator, Kirk Ciarrocca, fresh off his second tenure with Minnesota, and thought it would be great to get some perspective from Dan. Dan, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Aaron, thanks for having me. Appreciate being on the show.
So just wanted to start, obviously, Kirk Ciarrocca was the offensive coordinator at Minnesota from 2017 through 2019, returned in 2022, so 4 years spread over 6. Wanted to ask your general kind of thoughts and impressions as a Minnesota fan in terms of how he was received and kind of how he'll be remembered.
Yeah, I think I think the general fan perception is that he's a very good offensive coordinator. So from that standpoint, I think it's it's a big loss for Minnesota. Obviously, PJ had his good relationship with him after he left him once. He wanted to bring him back, brought him back again. But I think most of the fans here in Minnesota are sad to see him leave. There are a few that it's like, oh, maybe it's not such a big loss because of the conservative nature of the offense. But my theory on that is that the Minnesota offense has always been more conservative just because of the PJ game plan more than Kirk's methodology on how to call offensive plays.
So I did want to ask you about that in terms of his system, his philosophy, the different stops in his career. It does seem like he's been adaptable in terms of the personnel and kind of the coaches he's working for. I was curious how much his system and kind of offensive philosophy stayed the same or changed throughout his time with Fleck at Minnesota.
Yeah, I think the overall philosophy and the strategy of offense stayed the same from his first visit through when going to Penn State and then coming back. And the interesting piece that changed and part of the hesitation that Gopher fans had with him coming back last time was in the first stint, he leveraged the running backs, obviously, that we had at the time. Rodney Smith, Mo Ibrahim was a freshman at that point. But we also had two very good wide receivers in Rashad Bateman and Tyler Johnson. And that was what led to the potent 2019 offense. So PJ and Kirk both, leveraged the assets that they had at that point. And that was strong on the wide receiver side of things. What changed, or having said that, Minnesota's always been a pretty strong school for tight end usage, especially in the Jerry Kill era and even before that. So when Kirk was coming back, the question was, well, is he going to use his tight ends this time? And having seen what he had done with Freiermuth at Penn State, he came back and Brevin Spann-Ford here at Minnesota is highly regarded tight end coming into the season, and Kirk did exactly that. Brevin was one of our leading receivers on our offense, and although we still had Mo and our game was largely run focused, Kirk has shown the ability to leverage whatever assets he has, regardless of whether running back, wide receiver, or tight end.
Yeah, that 2019 team was obviously really impressive, and the offense there, just in terms of, it's funny because people do think of Minnesota as a run-heavy team, and statistically they are. But Tanner Morgan threw for over 3,000 yards in that year, 2019. I wanted to ask specifically about his development in terms of kind of what was he thought of as a recruit coming in, and how much does Ciarrocca get credit for developing him?
Yeah, well, the one thing, and I just want to get this out there, is the thing about Kirk is that he's good at identifying quarterbacks. So Tanner Morgan was the one that we brought on. He was a Western Michigan recruit. We brought PJ over and Tanner came with him. He made the change there. So he was recruited as a MAC level quarterback. But looking at the recruiting classes after that, some of the targets that they had and one of the commits that they actually had at the time was Brennan Armstrong, who went to Virginia, who now transferred to North Carolina State. Didn't come to Minnesota, still very, I'd consider highly successful Division I quarterback. Another miss that he had that we were interested in was Hank Backmeyer. Hank ended up going out to Boise State. He's now in the transfer portal, but again, definitely serviceable, definitely had an eye for talent there. Another one that he mixed on that we were second place on in recruiting was Max Duggan. Again, high-level quarterback. Kirk has an eye for quarterbacks, and that's part of the reason we're optimistic with the quarterbacks that we have, with Ethan Kaliakmanis coming in next year as our starter, who replaced Tanner this year. Regarding Tanner, he's a MAC-level quarterback, but he performed very well. And that's what Kirk will do is he won't give the quarterback too much to do, right? He'll make it black and white, keep it simple. I think he's an excellent coordinator for any young and up and coming quarterback, and I think he does a good job making sure to not overwhelm them in that process.
And just in terms of this past season, Kirk coming back, obviously there were some injuries with Tanner, and you have, I guess arguably or statistically your best running back in program history in Mohamed Ibrahim. And it did seem like they relied really heavily on him as the season went on. Do you think that was kind of a natural thing that would have happened anyway, or was it a case of Kirk kind of adjusting based on the injuries he was dealing with?
Yeah, in Minnesota, we refer to PJ's game plan as trestle ball, where his goal is to get the lead, early by halftime, maybe be ahead 17-10 or 17-7 at half, and then drive the ball down the field. And when you had Mo as such a sound running back, especially sound at getting, 1 or 2 or 3 yards on every first down to set you up in second and moderate and third and short, that was just the game plan they stuck with. What I would look for Rutgers fans to do when evaluating Kirk is look at how he balanced offense in the first half when Minnesota was behind. Then he was willing to go ahead, throw the ball. He opened up the offense a little bit as Athen got more familiar. Obviously, the first game he started at Penn State is not the time to, put the weight of the team on the quarterback. So, but in the game against Iowa, for example, we fell down early, and one of our best drives was right before half when they did open up the offense. They did let Athen throw the ball, and they were able to move it. But once again, in second half, Mo was getting yardage, so they stayed very conservatively. Some would say that was the right plan. Some would say that's the wrong plan. But, when Mo's accumulating 280 yards against Iowa, it's hard to be a skeptic of that. And I think what you saw with Kirk at Minnesota is he was the game plan and the play calling was largely dictated by the overall PJ trestle ball mentality. I don't think you'll have that same situation there with Schiano. I'm guessing you'll have a lot more balance than what we had here at Minnesota this last year.
Yeah, well, that brings up a very interesting point and is a concern of Rutgers fans in terms of how much authority Kirk will have to run the offense the way he wants to run it versus Schiano, who is kind of obviously PJ Fleck comes from the Schiano school, and Schiano definitely plays that way as well. He believes in winning with defense and special teams and clock, controlling the clock, time of possession. And so I guess my concern as a Rutgers fan is Minnesota has a lot more talent along the offensive line with their running backs, their depth, where if Rutgers is going to try to win that way, I feel, they're a couple years away from getting the proper depth and talent and to be able to, be successful running an offense that way.
Well, what's your perception right now around Gavin Wimsatt as far as his trajectory? How are Rutgers fans feeling there? I think, with a highly recruited quarterback like that, I think that was part of the appeal probably for Kirk to go. I mean, he's leaving a talented quarterback here, but a Gavin Wimsatt, there's considerable talent for Kirk to work with there and to mold into another potential high-level quarterback.
Totally agree. And I do think, that Kirk's experience developing quarterbacks is certainly an appeal. I think it's going to be really interesting. I think, Gavin Wimsatt fans are excited about his potential, but I think we're disappointed by his progress that he had this year or lack thereof, which, there were a lot of factors to that. And again, it goes back to the offensive line, which has a long way to go. And I have a lot of respect for Minnesota's offensive line and think they're really good. And obviously Ibrahim was kind of a special back and able to, create things out of nothing. Where, Rutgers has a really solid running back in Samuel Brown who got hurt. And you saw that in the Minnesota game, their first game without him, they had no offense at all. So I think there's certainly potential there. I'm excited to see what Kirk can do with Wimsatt. But I also think the offensive line is a far way away for, he's going to have to be creative, I think, in how he approaches things and how he kind of brings in talent moving forward, especially from the transfer portal in the next month or two will be, I think, a big part of how he's able to mold the offense for next season. How much is next season going to be what the offense maybe will look like in 3 years?
Sure. No, I'd agree with that. Hey, you guys still have Curtis Dunlap as well, right? One of our former offensive linemen. Is he a senior now?
I wanted to ask you because there's so much overlap between Minnesota and Rutgers in so many ways. But yeah, Dunlap became the starter. as a guard, and he's coming back. Well, actually, he hasn't formally announced yet for next year, but I think the expectation is he will be back.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, no, Curtis was a key part of the recruiting class that we had. I forget if it was 2018, but he came on with Daniel Falalele, so they were the right side of our line there for a couple of years together. And Falalele is now with the Ravens, having achieved it. And I think when he left, Dunlap was looking for a more prominent role than what he was getting when we were kind of around the 6-man offensive line a bit last year. So that made sense for him to move. And then you also have Joe Harris-Simiak, as your defensive coordinator, another big loss for us, but we're pretty happy with the defensive coordinator we have here. But anytime you lose quality coaches like that, PJ says his job is to keep elevating him and help his coaches get other jobs. But sometimes maybe he's doing too good of a job of it. But
yeah,
we'll see how it goes.
I did want to ask you what Minnesota fans kind of thought of, now Schiano's taken both your coordinators over the last year. And obviously there's a lot of relationships there. And, it's funny because Joe Rossi has been really successful at Minnesota. Mm-hmm. He did not have a good run at Rutgers, and that was actually post Schiano. So it's just interesting how coaches can be successful in certain places. As I mentioned, Ciarrocca was actually fired at Rutgers under Schiano the first time, which brings a whole other dynamic to his return. But I was curious if Minnesota fans cared at all that, Rutgers tends to, go after, has now taken their coordinators.
No, it's kind of, the ultimate form of flattery, I guess, is, stealing our coaches. I don't know. One of the things that we've done, and I don't know if you followed this, but with Ciarrocca leaving now, we ended up elevating 2 people into the offensive coordinator role. So PJ went with a co-offensive coordinator role where Matt Simon, the wide receiver coach, who was rumored to be in contention for the job last year when Ciarrocca did come back, he got elevated to a co-offensive coordinator, as well as Greg Harbaugh, who we brought in from Western Michigan last year to be a tight end coach this year. And now he is also, I think he's taking over quarterback coach and co-offensive coordinator. So I think what PJ's strategy is to go ahead and move 2 people in the role. That way, if we have success, you guys don't know which one to steal next. You got a 50-50 chance instead of just grabbing the one you really need. So that's PJ's kind of taking it to the next level there with his coaching strategies.
I like that. And they also, I think they hired Andrew Sauter, right, from Kent State as the wide receiver coach.
Yeah, actually. Yeah, I think so. We just had a few new coaches pop in, and I haven't had a chance to look a lot up on him yet. But I know we just grabbed him, and then also a new running back coach from Syracuse who had Minnesota ties.
Because Sauter was a name that came up with some Rutgers fans as, a potential target. He's never been an offensive coordinator, but he comes from a really good system. So, going back to Harris-Simiak, how is he thought of at Minnesota? I mean, he's a New Jersey guy, so, it comes as a natural fit for him to come back. But he also, I thought he did a really good job this last year. He was actually co-defensive coordinator at Minnesota, correct?
He might have been the last year. I know he was secondary coach for us. And then he was, again, last year during the coaching turnover phase, there was a threat that we might lose our defensive coordinator, Rossi, to Notre Dame. And this was before the Rutgers move, but Harris-Simiak was kind of, discussed or whispered as possibly being the person we would seek out next. So for defensive coordinator. So maybe that's a chance where if we end up down the line losing Rossi, maybe PJ will try to make a call back there to grab a former coach from Rutgers staff. But highly regarded. Evidently he had really good reputation here at Minnesota. And it looks like he's doing a good job there at Rutgers so far.
Going back to Ciarrocca, I guess how was it received when you came back in 22? And I guess, was there anything that obviously you lost some talent from that 19 team with the wide receivers who were really good. But I guess, was there any kind of drop off with the offense when Ciarrocca left? And did you feel that things kind of kicked back up with his return?
Well, when Ciarrocca left, we brought in a new offensive coordinator, Mike Sanford, who is the head coach. Was it Utah or Utah State? But he was loves quarterback. The Green Bay Packer Love. I can't think of his first name right now.
Oh, Jordan Love.
Jordan Love. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was Jordan Love. He took over as Jordan Love's, coach out there, and his performance, kind of spiral and went downward. So when it came to Minnesota, we had similar concerns. So he got a lot of heat from the standpoint of our offense taking a drop into 2020 being a COVID year. Same issue Kirk Ciarrocca had at Penn State. You had maybe a couple practices to implement your new offensive philosophy with a team you haven't worked with before. Tough situation for Kirk, and also tough situation for Sanford here at Minnesota.
Sure.
But then last year, some of the concepts that we ran offensively seemed to run more deeper routes for the wide receivers. And although we had a good offensive line from a running standpoint, if you look back at the Bowling Green game that we lost last year, when Sanford was our offensive coordinator, Tanner, we were getting heat on the quarterback. There was heat on Tanner. And a lot of times it seemed like he wasn't able to get to the open wide receiver, whether those were routes that were being run too deep, too long of a play routes being designed. It didn't work well. And it actually led to a couple losses. The Bowling Green and I believe last year, Illinois were two of the biggest examples there. In the 2021 season, meaning last year versus 2022 with Kirk here, where Kirk, I think, gave Tanner a few more, a little bit easier options. So when the heat did arrive, he'd have some near routes, slant routes that he could dump the ball off on a quicker timing basis than to avoid some of the pass rush issues that we had the previous year with Sanford as our offensive coordinator. Not many people are far more heartbroken to see a Ciarrocca leave than Sanford. I can tell you that.
Well, you said I perked up when you said the word slant, because Rutgers fans have long had frustrations with the previous coordinator and the interim. Rutgers was not running any slants the last few years, and nobody could understand why. And it was either, they never seemed to have those kind of safety routes in place. And with the offensive line struggling in pass protection, it was kind of a conundrum as to why they weren't, running more slants and quick pass plays. So it's good to hear that Ciarrocca, and I didn't know that, but that Ciarrocca likes to implement that more so.
Yeah. The other thing that you might look forward to the difference that we saw from Ciarrocca this time was not only more use of the tight ends. We were throwing slants to Bateman and Tyler Johnson back, the first round, but also just a few more dump offs to the running backs. Oh no, out in the flat. That was the other change that took place in the last season here, having Kirk Ciarrocca back. So I think like I said, I think he's going to look at the personnel, see who his stars are that, Wimsatt has available, and, give him some easy stuff first, to get him comfortable. And then as Gavin gets up to speed, he'll, expand the playbook from there.
And how much did, in terms of Tanner, I mean, how mobile was he? Was there ever any kind of RPO plays that they used to run?
They ran Tanner very seldom kept. He had mobility. I don't think anybody ever considered Tanner Morgan to be a highly mobile quarterback, but he wasn't a statue either there, and so there were a few times this year where he did take, and it surprised defenses. So it was good enough from that standpoint. The quarterbacks were looking at, that PJ has recruited since then, show more mobility than that. And I think that's what, Kirk was looking at, Kirk Ciarrocca was looking for when, the recruiting the Brendan Armstrongs, the Max Duggans, the Hank McMyers, those are all quarterbacks that have the ability to keep the ball on those options if they need to, just help keep the defense honest. So I would expect to see more of that for Rutgers into the next year.
And in terms of his recruiting, I know you're talking about the quarterbacks he's pursued, but what was his kind of general, perception of him as a recruiter? Obviously, coordinators, are a little bit different recruiting level than assistant coaches, position coaches. But we're just curious, or I guess how the recruiting was on the offensive side of the ball with him there.
Yeah, I guess I'd be speculating. I wasn't. I don't have the vision of what his recruiting, style is. But I do know with the recruits that he had gotten, he seems to center in on a couple of guys that he wants. We didn't get I don't recall him pursuing many 5 stars. The guys that we got are 4s or high 3s, but they fit. There's certain things he wants to make sure they know how to do, and he centers in on the type of quarterback that fits that. So whatever that is, um, uh, you know, uh, it's surprising to me. It's just surprising with the number of quarterbacks that are highly rated that never pan out. That a high number of the people that we had seen from watching the recruiting over the last few years that maybe didn't come to Minnesota, that went to other programs, still end up being successful quarterbacks. So, as far as his recruiting style, I don't think I I think he has his methodology on it. I don't think anybody's going to call him the most active recruiter, as far as, beating down the doors everywhere to find that. But he does find the pool of people that he wants to go out and see. And in the case of this last year, we got a quarterback by the name of Drew Viato, who he happened to like. He's a 3-star quarterback. He's got a bigger build. He's not as much of a mobile quarterback, but Kirk saw him throw, during camp out in the rain, and liked the way that he spun the ball, and gave him an offer and secured him. And you know that was the end of the recruiting for the recruiting class for that year. So he seems to know what he's looking for, and if he can find it in somebody and he can get that commitment, he'll close in on the guy and secure him.
And a couple more for you, just in terms of Ciarrocca overall. I guess, what are your thoughts on, not to disrespect the West, but the fact that he is going to be coming to the Big Ten East? He's going to be playing Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan State, Penn State year after year, at least for another season. We'll see if divisions go away once UCLA and USC come. But, one stat I saw on him was that when Minnesota did fall behind, I don't think they were. He had a lot of success in terms of comeback wins. I was just curious, kind of your thoughts on that. If he's how he kind of ran the offense in those situations.
I think that's more of a PJ Fleck stat. That was something that's been well circulated here, where when PJ falls down by halftime, we had gone like 0-22 in games that we were losing at halftime until just a couple of years ago. Since then, he's improved on that a little bit. But we were largely, during the Sanford years, we were definitely very run focused, good and bad. It's obviously good when you're winning games, but when you fall behind, and all of a sudden you want to kick your pass game into gear and you hadn't used it all year, it gets a little bit tough to execute. That is, if there's a lesson Kirk brings with him and shares with Schiano, I would think that would be where that pushback is. And if you're hiring a guy like Kirk, I would think that Schiano's in a position to listen to what he says, for the money that Rutgers is paying him. He's not a average price coordinator anymore. This is big time.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty crazy that, I saw he made $650,000 last year. Then he, was able to get that raise, and then now $1.4 million. Obviously, people were saying, cost of living and all that. And of course, there's part of that. But I mean, I came out yesterday that, Rutgers is also paying his buyout, $275,000 to Minnesota. They're paying the buyout on top of his $1.4 million salary for 3 years each. So yeah, it's a big investment. I agree with you. I mean, if you're going to invest in him, let him run his offense.
Well, and that's the thing is, how much money are you going to pay your quarterback coach or offensive coordinator who's working with your quarterback when NIL money floating around for these high level recruits is, rumored to be, very high. So, if you've got a resource like a Gavin Wimsatt, you can't really take a chance on wasting time with somebody you don't trust, who's talking to your quarterback. So for Schiano, it seems like, he probably knew the strengths and weaknesses of Kirk. I definitely consider him a very strong quarterback coach, just seeing what he was able to produce with Tanner, and the way that Tanner's was, far more relaxed this year, more understanding of the offense than what he had, the previous 2 years with Mike Sanford. So to to me, it just seems like it was a logical choice. I can kind of see the reason why Schiano would bring him back. Just having that trust, and you need to invest in whoever's talking to your quarterback.
Yeah, and I think getting someone with extensive play calling experience, getting someone with heavy quarterback coaching experience. Also, the Big Ten is a huge one, so I think he checks all those boxes. This is kind of maybe a tough question or unfair, but so right now he's looking to build the staff. They've let go of the offensive line coach. They're going to be looking for a tight ends coach. I doubt he'll tap back into Minnesota, but I was curious if there's anyone that worked for Kirk at Minnesota that you think potentially he might try to reunite with that maybe has moved on.
No, that's a tough one for me to answer, just from the standpoint of we've had turnover, but generally when people have left, they've gone to pretty good roles elsewhere. Where you can, in the only other ones that maybe would be available kind of in that pool, like we've had Mo Lundquist, who moved up. He's head coach at Buffalo. Our running back coach is now the head coach at Kent State. So these generally people are leaving PJ staffs. Sometimes they're lateral moves for more money, but sometimes they're there's a fair number of promotions worked in. You would almost have to look at, and Kirk didn't overlap with Mike Sanford, but I think there was a coach that went with Mike Sanford to Colorado, and I'm not sure where he's at. So yeah, to answer your question, no, I guess I don't have any recommendations from Minnesota on who he might tap into. But I would look at the Penn State staff from a couple of years ago just to see who was on that staff at that point. They've had some turnover on the defensive side with coordinators, and I'm not sure where they're at on the offensive side, but that would be a logical spot to look as to, where you might pull another assistant.
That makes sense. And then last question for you, actually, on the defensive side, another transfer that Rutgers took from Minnesota, Michael Flip Dixon.
In
the secondary. I wanted to ask about him. He seems like he was a key reserve, I guess, and played the nickel.
Yeah. So, when the transfer portal comes up, you read the fan forums and people leave and it's like, oh, we're better off without him. Oh, we're better off without him. Like the previous year we lost Bucky Irving to Oregon, big loss. That was a 4-star running back who was earning some carries with us, especially after Mo got injured last year. But with Mo coming back and we got Trey Potts back for this year, I think he just saw himself on the depth chart where he lost. That was a big loss. We also lost Kai Thomas, another running back down to Kansas last year, who happened to be in the transfer portal again. And then, there's some others where it's like, oh, that one hurt. That one didn't hurt. Most don't seem to hurt because they end up transferring downward, a smaller college. We had a couple quarterbacks, Zach Annexted and Jacob Clark, who were both on our team just a couple of years ago that transferred out last year, both went to smaller colleges. But Flip was, it was kind of curious because I think he would have been in a starting role this next year. He was a backup, but he did play some nickel, but he was also kind of played like that, half linebacker, half safety role. If you're playing nickel, but you need some run support, that's where he fit in well. He didn't, whatever the communication was, that he wasn't going to be one of the starting two safeties. He didn't want to be pigeonholed into that role. But the very solid player, likable player. A lot of the other teammates seemed to really be bummed that he was leaving. So it's I think he's a good get for you guys, whether they use him in a nickel or as or as a regular safety.
Yeah, well, I guess obviously the familiarity with Harris Simiak makes a lot of sense for him.
Absolutely.
To reunite, and he recruited him. So I think it's a good pickup. I'm excited about it, and really, Rutgers fans are just waiting now for Ciarrocca to get going in the transfer portal. Because, like I said, we need help everywhere on the offensive line, wide receiver, tight end. I'm glad you talked about that because Rutgers, they haven't utilized the tight end very well in recent years. So I think that Kirk hopefully making that a focus would be a positive. But I guess any last thoughts you have that would be insightful for Rutgers fans about Ciarrocca or just in terms of the move?
No, overall, I think it's a good hire. And I think it's one of the things when you talk about the salary level, it's like, are you going to play ball or not? It's something where, PJ just got an extension, and it happened right after the Iowa loss, and they didn't announce it until, later in the season after we beat Wisconsin. But some of the again, some of the fans are like, why are you giving him a raise? It's like he didn't do enough. It doesn't matter what we're in an age now where the coaching performance doesn't matter. It matters, but it doesn't, right? It's like if you want to play SEC or Big Ten ball, you're either going to keep your coach or you're not, or you're going to get a high level coordinator or you're not. And it's like, yeah. And if you're going to steal somebody from another program, you're going to have to pay more than that. So you're going to have to overpay a bit. But, we're getting into the, we're already seeing it with NIL, but with the new TV contract, we're getting into, Big Ten, SEC, we're big boy ball here. It's, why are you bringing in these high level athletes, whether on NIL or not, and trying to compete against the teams that do have an NIL resources? If you're not going to spend the money on the coaches, and what better positions to do it than defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, and head coach, right? I mean, those are the ones that are going to impact your team the most. So from that standpoint, you can't really question whether it's overpay or not. That's just what market rate is. So either you want the person or you want to break in somebody new and take your chances for a couple of years training and, a new coordinator that maybe isn't quite as experienced.
I think it's a great point to end on, for sure. I think that, yes, they did overpay. I mean, you could say statistically, financially, they definitely overpaid, but you're overpaying for a reason. And I think from a Rutgers perspective, the fact that they're willing to do that is a change, obviously, from many years past, and bringing Ciarrocca back and, paying him $4 million a year. That was a philosophy change in terms of being able to, spend at a Big Ten level. And I think bringing Ciarrocca back at this level is just reinforcement of they're still committed under Ciarrocca to compete at a really high level in the Big Ten. So you're right. I think you have to spend the money. Dan from Gopher Insight, I really appreciate all your insight and your time. You can find him on Twitter at Gopher Insight. Dan, anything else you want to plug?
Yeah, no, nothing else to plug. I did just want to ask you, though, what's the temperature like for Ciarrocca out there right now? Does he have a long runway, or is this kind of getting to crunch time and that maybe that was the impetus to bring in somebody like Kirk?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that, listen, he has an 8-year deal, $4 million a year. I don't think he's on the hot seat. I think that, certainly there was disappointment with the lack of progress this past year. I think that I think Ciarrocca recognizes he needs to win sooner rather than later, and the window with Wimsatt, the highest rated recruit, is closing in terms of, he's been there 2 years now, and he really needs to hit the ground running. Their schedule is kind of, I think, favorable going into next year. You have home games 3 in a row with Northwestern, Temple, and Virginia Tech. I think that's 3 winnable games at home against, teams that you need to compete with at this point of his tenure and beat. So I think there is some urgency for sure. I think he needs to prove that he can, get to 6 wins next year or the year after, or I think there will certainly be, again, I don't know if he's ever going to get fired, but I think that I think he recognizes that the window to start to make serious progress is in these next 2 years. And I think that it makes sense that he brought in a Ciarrocca to, I do think the positive of being able to maybe hit the ground running with him a little quicker than someone that he hasn't worked with before is another selling point of bringing Ciarrocca in.
No, that makes sense. Well, we'll definitely be rooting for you, especially against Iowa and Wisconsin next year in your crossovers. You drew 2 good ones for us, so the more you guys can win against those and maybe, put another L on Northwestern for us, we'll be big Rutgers fans over here next year.
Well, Dan, thank you again. Really appreciate it for all your insight. And like I said, you can check them out at Gopher Insight on Twitter. Is there any website or podcast they should check out?
Not yet.
All right. Well, we'll stay tuned. I'll keep posted, and you can send me an update, and I'll support you on that. But thanks again for all your insight on Kirk Ciarrocca, and we'll see how hopefully tenure 2 at Rutgers goes as well as it did at Minnesota.
All right. Sounds good. Good chatting with you, Aaron.
You too.